When Jeremy Corbyn led the Labour Party, the right-wing media presented his nationalisation plans as hard left and extreme. However, after a series of scandals, nationalising rail is back on the agenda, even at GB News. Here's Novara's own Bastani making the case against privatisation.
The companies are trying to create efficiencies to try and keep train fares down.
They're creating efficiencies because they need to give their shareholders dividends. If you look at, for instance, the water companies, we've had privatised water in this country since 1989. More than £70 billion has been paid in dividends. They've loaded onto themselves £60 billion worth of debt, and yet water bills have increased 50% more than inflation since 1989. It's a similar tale with trains. So, look, if we had...
Are you going to take me down the nationalisation route?
No, but look, if they were making these cost savings and they said this will directly benefit the customer, I might not agree with it, but like you say, it's a trade-off and it's an explicable one. What we have instead is a system where, frankly, the consumer is squeezed and squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. And when you have low margins in this industry, and rail has always been a relatively low margin industry anyway, well, where are you going to get profits from? It's from poorer customer service. And I think we are coming to a place now where we do need that conversation. Should it be in public ownership or shouldn't it? I tend towards the former, but people who tend towards the latter need to understand the quality of the service will get worse and worse and worse.
It's worth pointing out that about 60% of the revenue for train companies now is from the government. It's on life support because of the government, because of the changing ways of work patterns. People are working from home and passenger numbers haven't recovered since the pandemic. They're unlikely to ever do so. And the idea that cutting staff will reduce fares is for the birds. They won't. It'll just increase profit. And actually, quite a growing proportion of conservative, traditional, patriotic voters are now warming to the idea of public ownership because privatisation has been terrible.
Well, do you know, I think I'm one of them, right? When you say about those people, because I am a capitalist, I do like the whole kind of capitalist mentality and all the rest of it. I think it's good. I think profit is good. Aspiration is good. But even me, I'm getting to the point these days where I find myself going, well, actually, it is hard for these companies to justify the dividends, the profits and all the rest of it when so many people are in dire straits and their service, quite frankly, is absolutely rubbish. I'm trying to think of a word I could use on tea time. I did well and I'm proud of myself. My mum will be proud of me watching it.
GB News is often hostile territory when it comes to the likes of you or I. They didn't need much persuading there. Seems like everyone in the studio thought that privatising the rail was a terrible idea.
Stunning, right? Stunning. But I think a lot of people like Michelle Dewsbury is the host. They look at the polling, Michael. And my lesson from being in the media over the years is that people like to be popular, particularly with their base. And I think if you are hosting a show and you know that your base, the people you want to reach, blue-collar social conservatives, and then the opinion polls show that fewer than 20% of conservative voters think that water companies should be in private ownership. It's not far off that with regards to rail either. When you have clear majorities in support of public ownership with regards to utilities, water, rail, mail, and it's not just with Labour voters, it's not just with the public, but it's with Tories too. And by the way, that's not a youth thing, that's not an old thing. It generally is a sentiment shared across generations. Well, then, of course, you want to be popular with your audience. You want to be able to reflect their views. That's part of the shtick. And so I think it's very hard for people like Michelle, or frankly, anyone, even Nigel Farage, to continually champion, advocate, and argue for the private ownership of things like water and rail. And I think eventually that will extend to other utilities too. The argument for these things is simply non-existent. And I'll repeat the numbers I said on that show. We had the privatisation of water in 1989. Since then, we've had more than £70 billion of dividends paid out to water company shareholders. We've had 60 billion of debt lumbered onto those same companies. So you're looking at circa 130 billion pounds has really gone into the private pocket as a result of that privatisation. And at the same time, we've seen water bills outperform inflation by 50% since the late 1980s. And now we have the news coming out from Thames Water last week that because they've spent no money, or too little money, let's be accurate here, too little money on maintaining and servicing legacy water infrastructure, that next year water bills will have to go up by 40% in order to do the thing that they should have been doing all along, which is ensuring that the infrastructure they inherited is also future-proof. Anybody who doesn't want to be pointed at and mocked will say, yes, this isn't a sensible way to run things. I think with regards to rail, I think Michelle seems to support public ownership. And on water, I think she seems to want a much more heavily regulated system. But it does get back to this essential point, which I did make, which is that things like water, things like rail are low margin industries. They're not massively profitable industries. And when you're going to have to invest a ton of money, which you are going to have to do with water over the next couple of decades, if you're a private investor, why would you invest money in that industry? Why would you do it? Because you're guaranteed returns. How are you guaranteed returns? Through profits. How are those profits going to be made? Well, it's a low margin industry, so I guess there'll be higher bills. And also, we shouldn't build too much infrastructure. It's just a self-defeating, stupid way to operate public utilities. And then sometimes you get people saying, well, I support private ownership and privatization, but they shouldn't get dividends. Why the hell would somebody invest in it then? Stupid. Let's bring these things back into public ownership. And also, let's be realistic that this has been so catastrophically screwed up by successive governments, but starting with Margaret Thatcher and these privateers, these pirates, frankly, that we probably will have to have higher bills. But we're going to have to mitigate that, I think. And we're going to have to do it in an organized way, which will require public ownership. And like I say, also taxing the rich. Now, I said that previously, that we should tax the rich. People think, oh God, Aaron just wants to tax the rich, tax the rich. There's lots of money in this country. There is lots of money in this country. And there's lots of tax dodging in this country too. I'll give you a quick example. Boots the chemist, I only discovered this recently, Michael, as a quick anecdote. Boots the chemist used to be something of a patrician establishment. They used to look after their employees. And not many people know this, but in the 1930s, Boots was the leading working class library in this country. In 1933, 35 million books were taken at Boots the chemist. And they viewed their company as having a social mission. They had schools, they looked after their employees. An amazing story. Fast forward to today, between 2007 and 2013, Boots didn't pay, or they dodged, £1.1 billion in tax. They're a supplier for the NHS. Obviously, they get a huge amount of money from NHS prescriptions. They systematically overcharge the NHS. Little basic things. So a moisturizer that retails for £2, there's evidence that they've sold that same moisturizer for hundreds of pounds. Treatments which you can find elsewhere for £90, they've sold them to the NHS for thousands of pounds. So what's happened to Boots in the last 100 years really distills and demonstrates everything that's gone wrong in the body politic. And I think we're going to have to turn this around. But really, Michael, we're also going to need a massive cultural shift. That if you are wealthy, you're going to have to pay a damn sight more tax. If you're a shareholder, you're going to have to understand that you can't live on the same never that you've seen for the last 25 years. And if you think you can make money out of being a landlord and that you can just sit on your ass and it's as good as a job, well, you've got another thing coming. That's how the world worked for most of the last 100 years, 150 years before the Thatcherite revolution. If we have any sense in this country, we'll go back to the status quo ante.